thank you for coming in the rain today. You know how crazy New Yorkers are when they see a raindrop. So we all got there, and they're missing a good lunch and a good talk. So I'm glad you're here with us. I'm Karen Altfest. How many people didn't know that? Pat, I know you knew that. Why'd you put your hand up? So I'm glad to see you all, and we're going to have some fun today. And it's my pleasure to introduce my friend Beth Kobliner. You have in front of you a program that has a little bit of Beth's history, so I don't have to tell you that. You'll read it. Either you've read it or you will read it before you leave. Beth has 2 best-selling New York Times books, Get a Financial Life, and this new one on making your child financially savvy.
Make your kid a money genius.
Oh, I'm sorry, even better. Make your kid a money genius. And I think that there's good advice for all of us there. And I know a lot of you have young children, and a lot of you have young grandchildren. So either way, or if you just want to hear some good advice for yourself, let me tell you what WSJ, WallStreetJournal.com, just said about Beth. They said, financial literacy begins with a chat. Americans are notoriously weak when it comes to financial literacy and to teaching it. Just 22 states require high schools to offer personal finance courses, and of those, only 17 of those states require high school students to take a course in personal finance. So you see, to have somebody here who's an expert in financial literacy is a real bonus. So in short, teaching personal finance to children often comes down to parents who themselves may not be well-versed or confident in matters of personal finance. Enter best-selling author Beth Kobliner, a personal finance expert who sat down with Wall Street Journal wealth advisor to offer some tips from her latest book on the ins and outs of saving, investing, and managing money. So you have a real expert here in front of you who's going to tell you a lot of things and even is kind enough to answer your questions, so don't forget to think of them. And you will each be getting a copy of your book when you leave if you hand Marina the evaluation form. You didn't think there wouldn't be a catch, right? You knew there would be. And if you write on that little yellow sticky on everybody's table how you would like your name addressed in the book, so that we get the spelling correct and everything. So both those are easy. You can do them. And you're going to hear good advice. I just want to tell you how I met Beth a long time ago. I don't know if you remember, and that was we were both at the same conference, and I'd like to tell you we were both learning a lot. We were both, we were, it was wonderful opportunity for both of us, but actually we're both in line to get our breakfast. So please welcome Beth Kobliner.
Hi, welcome. I'm so happy to be here. So happy to see Karen. I miss Lou, but I have to tell you the behind the scenes story to that story is that when we met, I had just started at Money Magazine. I was a staff writer. I was 23, and before that, I had been writing, sort of ghost writing, researching for Sylvia Porter. I don't know if anybody remembers her. Yeah. So I was at Money Magazine, and I was an English major from Brown. I had no background in economics, and I started writing for Money Magazine. And Karen and Lou, we were in Nashville, and we met, and I glommed onto them. And I had never been to a business conference before. So they said there's the Grand Ole Opry. And I latched onto them the whole weekend. They probably were like, who is this kid? Leave her alone. So not only were they kind and sweet and inviting, but they were super smart and had such integrity. And I feel very lucky to have met them early on in my career, not only because I learned so much from them, but also I am a real cynic when it comes to investment advice and all that is provided to people out there. and they are literally the only people I refer people to. So I just wanted to say thank you for the knowledge. Thank you for giving me a name to tell people when I can actually give a good recommendation. So anyway, I wanted to first start in. Research shows that parents are more likely to talk to their kids about sex, drugs, or alcohol than they are about money. Money is really the last taboo. And whether it's because we're embarrassed by how little we know, or we're ashamed for our kids to know what we don't know, people aren't talking to their kids about money. I've been writing about this topic now for 30 years, and I was on President Obama's council on financial capability. And for that council, I was tasked with coming up with what are the key pieces of advice parents need to teach their children about money. And I put together this website for the president and the council called Money as You Grow. And what it did was boil down the 4 lessons parents need to teach kids from age 3 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 13, and so on. And what was interesting was that there was no, of course, advertising budget or any money put into promoting this website, which was on the Treasury Department's website, but it went viral. And 1.4 million people via social media, mostly moms, went on the site. And it made us realize that people are really hungry for this information. They want to know, how do they teach their kids about money? So as a result, I decided to write this book. And what I wanted to do today, if that's okay, is just go through the 4 most common questions I've been hearing on the road. I've been on a 20-city book tour. I have 2 kids now in college. I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old. And when I met you, I wasn't even married. I wasn't even close to being married. And but it worked out. Great husband, very lucky. I have a 13-year-old, and I left my son and my 13-year-old, and they seemed to have a grand old time when I was gone. So I really used this opportunity, having 2 kids in college, to kind of get out there again, and went all over from Detroit to Chicago to San Francisco, LA, Seattle, to really talk about this. So I wanted to go through the 4 most common questions I was asked on the road, but there are plenty more subjects and questions and answers that I deal with in my book. Okay, the first question is, what age should I start talking to my child about money? Research shows that by age 3, kids understand basic money concepts. They understand value. They understand exchange. You give money, you get something back. And they also understand about making choices. It's raining, so we'll put on our boots. You know, it's sunny, maybe we'll put on a pair of shorts. By age 7, we know that many of those behaviors having to do with money are actually set. That impulse control and delayed gratification. And I heard an oh my gosh from the audience. The good news is, it doesn't mean that a child by age 8 and up can't learn. In fact, there are really important everyday moments that you can use to teach children money basics. It's harder, though, for this generation, in part because young children don't really see cash anymore. When you think about it, I know when I was a girl, I remember my parents would pay the bills once a month, and they'd sit at the kitchen table, and they had a check register. And my dad, my dad would fill out the check, or my mom would do her set of bills, and I saw what they were doing. But today, we all pay our bills pretty much online. I remember opening my first bank account. Who remembers opening their first bank account? Every time I ask that, it's really interesting. People smile. It was a really good experience. We remember opening that first bank account. It was sort of a rite of passage. But today, little kids, they're not opening bank accounts because parents, again, are doing it all online. In fact, kids don't even see cash change hands in a supermarket anymore. It's all swiping cards or even phones. We have Venmo now and Apple Pay. So it really takes some doing to teach your kids about money in the way they should understand money. In my book, perhaps my favorite anecdote was a friend of mine who was at Target with her son. And she was buying some juice boxes, and she put out a $20 bill at the cash register, and her son said, "Mommy, don't pay for it. Use the card." And a very famous MIT study found that when people use plastic, they spend twice as much than when they use cash. It's been attributed to something called the pain of paying. When you have to take out a wallet and start putting out those bills, it feels like you're giving something away. And so we tend to spend less when we're using cash. My daughter, when she was 13 years old, I remember a bunch of her friends were going shopping for the first time at Bloomingdale's, not far from here. And she said, "Mom, a lot of my friends' parents are giving them credit cards. Their credit cards." And they told them, and they were good parents. They gave them a limit how much to spend, but they were giving them credit cards. And I said, "I'm going to give you cash." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "You'll see." And she left for the store, and it was preschool shopping. I handed her $100, and I said, "You can buy some clothes, and we'll see what you come back with." So sure enough, she got home, and she said, I got to the cash register, and the stuff that I wanted was $106, so I had to put something back. I said, "Yeah, wow, that's right." That learning the idea, right, duh, these are a smart kid. She was like AP math, or not yet, but she was in advanced math at the time, but it was the realization that money is finite, and you can't get everything you want. The other story is, and I've been hearing this again and again as I travel throughout the country, what happens to these kids who aren't really money savvy when they go to college? And the story that I heard, that a mom was explaining when her son was at school, by the third week, he called home and he said, "Mom, bad news, my checking account has been hacked." She's like, "Oh, it's been hacked?" He said, "Yeah, no more money in it." And she had sent him to college with $500 on a debit card. She's like, "All right, let's figure this out. Wait a second, didn't you tell me you went to visit another friend and you took a train? How'd you pay for that?" "Oh, yeah, I used my card." "And didn't you go out to lunch with your friends?" "Oh, that's right, I used my card." He didn't realize that he had spent all the money out of the account. He just thought it's been hacked. And I've heard that story a few times from different parents. So it's clearly important by college, kids understand this. And speaking of college, I just want to talk really quickly about credit cards. When I was in college in the 80s, they were handing out credit cards at tables. They would set up a table right in the middle of campus, and everybody would get a credit card. One woman told me, "Yeah, I was at a frat party. I walked out with a credit card." There were a lot of credit cards being given out in the 80s. Thanks to the 2009 Card Act from President Obama, those rules have been changed, and a kid doesn't get a credit card unless they are 21, or they can show they have income, or a parent cosigns. And that one's not so good. I like the first two. You have to be 21 or income, but cosigning a credit card, I just wanted to say it in this group, cosigning a credit card with your kid is a really bad idea. Not only will you be responsible for the debts that they charge, but it will damage your own credit report if they're late. And that late payment could stay on your credit report for 7 years. So that's one to be aware of. Okay, so the first question was what age? Question 2, what trait matters most for young children when it comes to money? The answer is waiting. We wait for our birthdays. We wait for the swings at the park. I used to wait for The Wizard of Oz to come on TV once a year. You have to teach your kid to wait and save up for something you really want. There's the famous marshmallow experiment that showed this. Walter Mischel, professor at Stanford, what he did was he looked at 5-year-olds and he said, "I'm going to put them all in a room," and he had experimenters give each child a marshmallow. And they would say to the little 5-year-olds, "Well, you can eat it now or you can wait. And if I come back and you didn't eat that first one, I'll give you a second marshmallow." So the experimenters put the kids in a room, and they had that double mirror so they could watch what they were doing. And as soon as they walked out, some of the kids, looked at the marshmallow and they went, that was it. They ate the marshmallow, one gulp, they were done. But some of the kids sat and looked at the marshmallow, and then they'd look away and they'd wait, and they waited and they waited, and they actually waited the full 15 minutes for the experimenter to come back in, and they got 2 marshmallows. And then Walter Mischel tracked those kids for their lives. So they were 5 years old. He's still tracking them. He's up at Columbia now, and he's in his 80s, but he's still actively working and still tracking those kids who are now in their 50s. And what he found over the years, just some highlights, is those kids on average the ones who waited, got on average 200 points higher on their SATs, on average reported better relationships with friends and family, and they actually had lower body mass indexes. It's interesting, though, because that story can be sort of terrifying if you're a parent, but it's interesting that it wasn't that, and his research later went on to show this, it wasn't just that these children, or it wasn't at all really that these children are great at self-denial. They were just able to switch to something else or distance themselves from that marshmallow for 15 minutes, what we call now executive function, the ability to switch. And some of the kids would whistle and sing songs and try to really not look at that marshmallow, and others would pretend, it's in their head, it's not really a real marshmallow. And that concept of waiting is very akin to the concept of waiting and saving up for something you really want. You can give your child a piggy bank or a jar and say, you want another Lego set? Okay, we're going to wait and save up for that. And you can, on the way home from school, say, you know what? Yeah, we could buy a snack for $1, or we can wait, have it at home, and put that $1 we would have used on the snack, but put it in the jar. Talk about trade-offs, or as it's called, opportunity costs. You can give your child matching. For every $1 they put into their jar, you give them 50 cents or even $1. That's a 50% or 100% return on your money. Guaranteed. Even the Altfests, I don't know, could guarantee 100% on their money. Or you can even talk about the 8th wonder of the world, tax-free compound interest. You can start with a 10-year-old and say, okay, if we put away $100 a year, just $100 a year, and we do that every year for 10 years, and leave it there and never put in any more, you can invest that money for them in an index fund, and by the time they're ready to stop working down their line, there will probably be about $50,000 in that account. You can go with the child on investor.gov if they're interested and plug in different numbers. And kids love to see numbers go up, and they love the idea of growing money. I'd say all of these tips are ways to think about how do you get a child to be motivated and to delay gratification. But sometimes it's more than words, but it's actions. One of the most tricky issues for parents is when you're in the supermarket, you're at the checkout line, and your child sees something he really wants. He's like, I want that candy, or I want that gum, or Shopkins. That's a big thing now. They're little toys that kids love. The best thing you could do to a child, research shows, is say no. There was a researcher at Duke, Terry Moffat, who looked at this issue of being able to control your impulses and tell a child no. And at the checkout line, when you say no, those children who are not given what they wanted at the moment they wanted it were less likely to be in credit card debt. And parents who said yes continuously, those kids, when tracked to their early 30s, had higher credit card debts. So question 3. So we talked about age and we talked about traits of waiting. Question 3 is, should we pay allowance? That's a real popular one. I looked at a dozen research reports, and from all over the world, actually. It was 24 research reports. And the answer is it doesn't really matter. Some studies show it's good to give allowance. Some studies show it's not good. And the bottom line is, if you're going to give a child money in any way, you want to follow these 4 rules. You want it to be clear what it's for. You want to be consistent. If you say to your child, all right, you're going to have to pay for meals out with friends. We're going to pay for your basics and your living expenses, but every time you go out with your friends, that's on you. Don't let them then pull on your heartstrings the next day and say, oh, but all my friends are going and I'll be missing out. You have to be consistent. You have to use cash with kids. Like I talked about before, cash is really important for kids to understand. And there are a lot of apps out there, and there are a lot of ways to transfer money from your account to their account, and parents are saying more and more that's how they're doing allowance. That's a mistake. You want your kids to see the cash, hold the cash, and hold it and put it in their accounts and own it themselves. And also the final one is don't pay for chores. Doing chores without being paid is a way to teach a child responsibility. That we're a family, we're a team, and you have these chores, and I'm talking really simple ones. Making your bed, putting your clothes in the hamper, emptying the dishwasher. And research from University of Minnesota found that kids who start doing chores at young ages, we're talking 3, 4, 5, kids who do chores without being paid, that act of doing chores without being paid is one predictor of achieving financial milestones, such as graduating from school and starting a career. In other words, they track children who did chores without being paid over several years and found that that responsibility, that inherent sense of responsibility and being a part of a team player, was something that was really important for a child's development and led to hitting those milestones. The final thing about chores is girls, according to the University of Michigan, they did a study and looked at girls do 30% more household chores than boys, which is crazy, and it's something that parents need to be aware of, and grandparents. And finally, giving kids money for grades does not work. Roland Fryer, a Harvard professor, did an amazing randomized control study and found that giving kids, bribing kids, or saying you're going to get $100 if you get an A, it does not work. It does not boost their grades, and it's not worth doing. And again, I think it goes back to just like the chores, it's that inherent sense of owning the task and feeling that it comes from within is what makes children successful in the long run. Question 4, the last question. How do we talk about paying for college? I mean, how do we even begin these conversations? What is clear is, and this is something that's important to explain to your kids or grandkids, is college is still one of the best investments you can make. When you go to college, you earn between $300,000 and $1 million more over your lifetime. There are about 4 studies on this, and I looked at all of them, and somewhere between $300,000 and $1 million more. Of course, people now are talking about the Mark Zuckerberg effect. Actually, I made that up. But it's the idea that Mark Zuckerberg didn't go to college, so maybe it's better not to go to college and start an app. That doesn't make sense. It's important to talk about college when your child is still in middle school. I would say about 8th grade, beginning of 9th grade, because first off, gives you a chance to start thinking about what schools you can afford. There's some great websites out there. At the Department of Education, there's some great calculators that let you figure out what your family expected contribution will be. There's something called the FAFSA forecaster that if your family may be eligible for financial aid, you can plug in the numbers and see what you'll be expected to pay and then search for what schools may give you more aid. It's important to stick with federal loans. And it's actually important, I think, for this group in particular to know that research shows that kids who contribute to their college education financially, whether it's taking out loans or actually giving a little bit of money to college, on average have higher GPAs than kids who don't contribute to college, even a little bit. And we also know that kids who work in college actually have higher GPAs than kids who don't work in college, but you must work in an on-campus job, and you can't work more than 20 hours a week. And the on-campus job being that you're probably more invested in the school and you feel really connected to it, so you want to do well. The other thing about college is one rule of thumb is don't have your kid take out student loans that are greater than their expected first year of income. And also, it's important to encourage your child to make sure to graduate in 4 years. Only 50% of kids today graduate from college in 4 years. That can be not only expensive for more years of college, but also the opportunity cost of missing out on that year of earning money. The final college point I wanted to make, and this is more of probably a public policy point than anything out, is research has found that when parents set up an account, a savings account earmarked for their kids' college, and they tell their child, we have money that we're saving for your college, those children are 7 times more likely to go to college regardless of how much money is in the account. Whether there's $10 or $10,000 or $200,000, those kids are 7 times more likely to go to college, which really is something that more and more people who are interested in philanthropy and helping children are seeing, that maybe there's something there. Maybe we can figure out a way to open accounts, and many states are doing this now. Connecticut does it. When a child is born, they put a couple of $100s in an account, and by the time the child reaches age 4, if the parents put in a little bit, the state will put in a little bit more money. And it's a trend in terms of states doing this for their families in their states. Okay, so just to wrap up, I wanted to talk a few minutes about how to talk to kids. Number 1 is don't fight with your spouse in front of your kids about money. Research has found that when children in college, kids in college, young adults in college were asked if their parents fought about money, and those whose parents did fight about money, or they saw their parents fighting about money, were much more likely to have credit card debts of $500 or more. So it's important to keep those disagreements behind closed doors. We also need to talk to girls about money. There are many studies that show that we talk to boys about money, we talk to boys about investing much more than we talk about that to girls. And I think some of that is just awareness. I had a man in my office recently who is very philanthropic, and he runs a nonprofit himself. And when he read that, he said to me, now that I think about it, I always tease my daughter about her shopping, and I talk to my son about stock tips. So it's just being aware sometimes of, he was a good guy, but being aware of what you're doing is really important. My favorite experience in my career was being able to teach Elmo about money. I was on Sesame Street a few years ago. It's online if you want to see it. And I got to teach Elmo about saving, sharing, and spending money. And what was most interesting after the show was they did an experiment. They did what they call an impact study to see whether this show really teaches kids or not. And they had a big group of parents, and then they had a control group. And the group of parents watched the show with their child, and they found that not only did the parents and children who watched the show, not only did the children understand a little bit more about saving money and really get the concept, but more parents who watched the show saved money. In other words, those parents who watched started saving more money in their family budget. So it really makes the point clear, which my father, who is an educator in the New York City public school system, who's sitting in the back there for many, many decades, he explained to me that when you teach children, you're also teaching the parents. And to wrap up with two stories, I'm originally from Queens, and I think sometimes about how did I get into personal finance writing? And I think about the fact that what we do as parents really has an impact on our children. Besides doing all these things right, how we behave and how we model behavior for our kids has an impact. And I want to tell you two stories about my childhood really quickly. So I was thinking about this very recently, how my mom was sort of like a Wall Street arbitrager. Now, I just said she was a stay-at-home mom, so how was she a Wall Street arbitrager? She would only shop at the local supermarket Walbaum's when it was triple coupon day. So if something was $1 off, she'd only go when it was $3 off. You'd get $3 off. Plus, she would buy in bulk. In those days, they didn't know to limit the number you can buy, so she would buy 50 rolls of toilet paper, 50 cans of tuna, things that were not perishable, and you could keep. We had a pantry in our basement, and I didn't know until I hit my 20s that not everyone had a big pantry in their basement filled with tuna fish. And then my mom would get coupons from the supermarket, and you could redeem them for, she redeemed them for plates and silverware and glasses. So basically, all our kitchenware was from Walbaum's. And my dad still has it. It's really nice. And it was a way that when I think back, she probably didn't really, in the end, if you net it all out, she didn't really pay. Walbaum's was paying her to shop there. And the final story is about my dad. When my dad was in his probably 30s, it was in the 1960s, and he told my mother one day that the New York City public school system was now allowing teachers to save up to half, 50% of their salary in a pension plan. So the first year you can save 50%, as much as 50%. The second year you could save a little less, and it went down. So he said to my mom, we are going to put half of my salary, I think we should put half of my salary into this pension plan. And my mom said, Harold, it's my dad's name, are you kidding? We have a mortgage, we have 3 children, we have a car, we can't afford it. And my dad said, we can't afford not to. And I must have heard that because that story really stuck with me. And I think that those kind of lessons and how you show kids what you do in your behaviors as a parent really matters. And finally, my dad, still at 87, he likes to hand out flyers about my books. Now we have, I'm sure that's a Money Genius, Make Your Kid a Money Genius, the book that the Altfest so generously are giving you actually hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I think thank you. I think it's mainly because my dad has been handing out flyers. The Walbaum's is now a food emporium. And he also has been staying with us for a while. My mom sadly passed away this summer. My parents were married for 65 years, happily married. But he's been staying with us, and he's been walking through Central Park, handing out flyers for my book. And my dad always says when he gives the flyer to someone in the food emporium, they say to him, you know what? And sometimes, what I forgot to say, he sometimes gives them a book. If he really likes an employee, he'll give them a book. And besides him getting better fresh soy milk from the back, now that he has this relationship with the person at Food Emporium, he also hears often from someone who says, thank you so much for teaching me the secrets. I had really nice parents, but they weren't the Altfests. They didn't teach me money basics. And what I realized is the reason I wrote this book was to teach and try to impart as best I can the secrets to everyone here and everyone that I've met. So thank you so much. I'd be happy to take questions or comments, or thank you.
I'd like to ask the first question.
Sure.
And I don't know if everybody everybody can hear me, so I'll just change places for a minute. Thank you, Beth. That was really fun and wonderful and good advice. And one of the hardest things, I think Lou, I can't speak for him, but one day Lou and I were asked by a teacher, our kid was in fifth grade, and that teacher asked us to go teach a class of finance to the children. Well, that was really, really hard. They were very smart. They didn't have boundaries, so they asked also, like, before they were born, if 15 years ago I had bought IBM, like where's this coming from, It was really fun. And I left the investment questions to Lou, and I did a little budget for them on, if you get an allowance of X dollars, and then say whatever it was, I don't remember the time, but $2, you put $1 away for something for the future that you really want. You spend 50 cents now on something you can't live without, like an ice cream cone or candy bar, and then 50 cents towards helping somebody else, and you don't have to give them the 50 cents, you can wait till longer. And it was so challenging and so fun. So my question for you is that I know that I'm waiting, hopefully, nobody's pregnant yet, but I'd like to be a grandparent. But my son's married. But so we're waiting. But in the meantime, I know that from my friends and from my clients that there are so many rules that are different how parents interact with their children and how grandparents interact. So are there different ways the generations should be talking to kids about money?
Right. I love that story. I did the same at a similar kind of school, and I got the same kind of questions. Only kids were asking about Apple, Apple stock. But I found that at my talks around the country, what's been really interesting to me is not only are mostly moms coming, some dads, but a lot of moms, but they're bringing their moms with them. So I'll often have a parent in maybe 30s and then a mom or dad in their 60s or 70s. And I always get the nods from the parent, the 60-year-old or 70-year-old. They're like, yeah, that's what we said. That's what we said. And it's been interesting to me. I think it's challenging. I can only imagine my daughter's 21 and she has a nice boyfriend that we like, but she has a while to wait. But how you talk to your grandchildren or your grown children about how they're raising their children can be a very, I think, complicated situation. And one thing I've heard from women is they'll sometimes come over to me and they'll say during the Q&A or privately, they'll say, my husband was brought up in a certain way and I was brought up in a different way. He was given all the money he needed. I had to work for my money. Now we disagree on how to have our children, what they should do. So my answer is give them the book, because then they could see the right way to do it. And I'm saying that facetiously, but I think sometimes if you have either a financial planner who can help be a impartial person, or I know with Get a Financial Life, my book that's been out for 20 years, couples would always say to me, I finally just left it on my husband's pillow, and he got the hint, But I think those kind of conversations, and young women, this is the final thing, they've said to me, my mother-in-law, blaming the mother-in-law, my mother-in-law gives our children so much. When they go visit her, they get stuff, and they go to the store, and and I sort of say, well, that's the grandparents. That's okay. That's my rule. That was my mother's rule. Grandparents may be a little different. When we're talking about small things. But frankly, it's also good to take into account, because this daughter-in-law was saying to me, it makes it really hard, because when the kids get home, I have to say, well, we don't do it that way. And I encouraged her to say, that's fine. You don't do it that way. Your child is your child, and maybe visiting grandparents is a different experience. But I think there are all kinds of ways to do this, but clearly the most important thing is talking and being mindful of the pressures. My mom used to always say to me, you work, and your kids have a lot more going on, and you live in Manhattan, and it's a busy life, and I grew up in Queens, and it was pretty simple, and there wasn't that much to do, frankly. So I think being mindful of the fact that maybe your children, if you have children and grandchildren, that there are other stresses in place. So I hope that answers the question. I do have a chapter on charitable giving in the book to speak to your point too. There's a lot of good research out there. Yeah.
I have a little story and then a question that comes out of it. So, it's for the video. So I'd like to tell a story about my daughter and saving, and then I'd like to ask your advice about how to carry it forward. So I think she was about 12 years old, and she had quite a bit of money in her wallet because her accumulated birthday money was there, and when I ran out of cash, I would borrow from her, and then when I put it back, I'd always stick an extra 20 or whatever. You know, it was a great service for me. There was the cash when there wasn't enough cash to do something, and I'd pay her back. So she watched this grow, and she liked it a lot, and I said, maybe this is time to go get a little bank account. So we walked into a bank, and we sat down, and the lady there, I recalled the passbook savings thing we used to have. Well, they don't have those anymore. No. But she said, okay, so you can give us your money, and you will earn 0.01 interest every year if you leave your money with me. And my 12-year-old sat there and did a little calculation in her brain. She took a candy off the desk and said, well, thank you. And we walked right out. So she's the one in the family that has good financial sense. So I still have...
Great story.
I still have, bat mitzvah money and stuff is accumulated, and I've taken it from them and put it someplace or other in a bank account doing nothing. And I read the other day when I was falling asleep, so I don't remember all the details, but it was a crazy plan in which parents can start a savings account for their children, and then somehow or other it gets converted to an IRA when they start earning a living, and it can accumulate huge amounts of money. So, one, what is the best thing that I could do for my children with the savings that I have of cash that I have for them, and should they be required to contribute a certain amount to that pot as it grows? Would that help in the whole thing?
Right. That's a great story, great question. For younger children, there are ways. First of all, there are banks that pay higher rates. I was on PBS NewsHour, and they kind of sprung on me. They said, okay, you wrote this book. Here are 6 little kids, ages 3 to 5. Show us how you teach them about money. So we had to go to a bank, and and they were amazing. It was a lot of fun. But I think that it turned out in Washington, there was a bank that paid 2.5% interest for a children's account up to $10,000. So you can shop around and look for. I was just in Maine, there was a credit union that pays 3% up to $10,000. So that's sort of a quick answer. I don't know about this. Do you know about this account that converts? Somebody else asked, I have to look into that. I don't know what that is. But I do know that you can open, it sounds like your daughter's very sophisticated and should be interning with the Altfests now that her bar mitzvah money is, yeah. There you go. But I think that it's important for her to learn. She might be interested in learning about investing. And I have a whole section in my book about index funds and what they are and how they work. And you can start at Vanguard with an ETF, an exchange-traded fund, for as little as $100. Now, my investing chapter starts off with a story of a friend of mine, a mom, very, very successful. She's a doctor, and her husband's a doctor, and they gave their 16-year-old $1,000 for his birthday to say, here, invest it, play with the market. And personally, I think that's not a great way to teach kids about investing, because if they do well, they think I'm a genius. And they think, they know it all. And as we know, it's other than good investment advisors, a lot of it can be random if you don't have a track record over time. But also, if they do poorly, they think, I'm never going to invest again. So not that index funds are foolproof, but you can open it and show her and talk to her about it and open an account for her. In terms of her continuing to contribute, it really depends on what the goals are. I mean, you may decide some of that bat mitzvah money goes to an organization she picks, a charitable organization. Some of that money you want her to invest, talk to her about index funds, and have her watch it. She might really like watching it grow, it sounds like. And in terms of her contributing, I think that she will face other expenses down the road. So in high school, certainly, she could be contributing to that if you think that's the right thing to do. I don't think there's a super right answer here, but I do think that a child who's interested in this, it's great to give them an answer. What I did with my kids when they were really little is I called the bank in advance and said, could you find your nicest person to explain this to me? Now this was, my child's 13 and I did it when he was 4, so it was a long time ago, interest rates were higher. But I would say, I don't know if Karen agrees with that or disagrees, but she's too politic to say anything now. I mean, also there's another thing, there are online banks. If you want to keep the money super safe for a young child, there are online banks that are paying higher interest rates too. Yeah.
Okay, so most graduating students have been living in this bubble of like, I'm a student, I don't have any debt or, okay, so how do you, now that they're 21, 22 years old, how do you refocus them to, now that they have this big responsibility of paying back this loan and most of them just want to party?
Right. I think a lot of children, a third of them, we know a record number, are moving back home with their parents. I think that actually is a fine idea and is actually a pretty good idea as long as you don't mind as the parent. But making clear what the ground rules are right up front. You know, we want you to, first of all, figure out what student loans you have. And I have a whole chapter in my book about education at every age, and then particularly during college, well, pre-college, what kind of loans you should or shouldn't get, during college, and then after college. But saying to a child, we're going to put this in writing. We're going to say you have to pay off your student loans monthly. And before that even, you have to have a job, and it may not be your dream job, because we know the big thing going on, unemployment isn't so bad for college graduates now, but underemployment is really what's happening, and kids are not getting the jobs that they had hoped for. You still have to have a job. One idea is, I lived at home for a year, I had $10,000 in debt, which was a lot at the time, and the median debt load right now is $15,000. The average is $37,000. When kids graduate from college. But I think making it clear they have to pay off their student loans. If you want them to contribute some rent, some parents say, you know what, that's not an issue, I just want them to pay off their loans. But if you do want them to contribute to rent or pay for groceries or contribute in that way, make it clear. Really writing it down makes a difference and it avoids confusion. Yeah. Right. I think that it's a very tricky time for young people, and I think this generation is very aware of what a tricky time it is for them. And I was yesterday on a Facebook Live with Reuters, and a few people wrote in to say, but you don't understand. I'm in my 20s, and I just graduated with so much debt, and I had to say, you know, in the 80s, there was a recession too. And everybody said, and I was in my 20s at the time, and I can't save, I live paycheck to paycheck. How can I make this work? I have credit card debt. And it's just explaining in a calm way that every generation feels this way. And I just had this conversation with my freshman in college. She was like, I have a paper due, and this due, and that due. I'm like, you know what? First after, I said to my husband, what do we do? And then we called him back and we said, everyone feels this way. That's what freshman year is about. And we sort of calmly explained, we all go through that and you will push through that. And the same with people in their 20s. I do think that we can't not teach our kids about money, and then when they graduate from college, suddenly we're like, okay, now you have to take care of it. I think that it's like giving a kid a car without having them have to take driver's ed. I think there are things to explain, credit reports and credit scores, and going through it as you can. I think as much as you can be clear and non-judgmental goes a long way. Dad, did you have a question or point to say?
I wanted to point out that in 1968, It wasn't my pension.
Oh.
Because one of the things I went into the school system.
Correction,
I grew
TDA.
I grew up in the Depression. And in 1929, I was born. And we went through hell during the Depression. And we moved from apartment to apartment. My father wasn't working. My mother was the breadwinner. They were immigrants to this country. And we had 4 children, and I slept in the same bed with my brother. And I grew up in the Bronx. And we had very, very little, so that made a great impression on me. Now, one of the things I was listening to just now was children have to begin to deal with suspended gratification. That's so important. I must tell you a funny story, that nobody had telephones in those days. The only telephone was the candy store. So in order to communicate with somebody, you would call the candy store. So at about 8 or 9, I figured out that this is a way to make some money. So I'd stay in the candy store for a few hours. There was a pinball machine. I never put a nickel in. And I waited for calls, and I'd call, pick up the phone. I run down the block, Mrs. Jones, telephone. And then Mrs. Jones would come down in her hair curlers, and she'd run down. She'd go into the phone booth, and then she'd give me a nickel or a dime. Now, I got the dime and the nickel. I put it in my pocket. And here I'm sitting in a candy store. And I tell my grandchildren, look, in front of me is candy bars and other things, and I wouldn't buy for a penny anything. I put it in my pocket, and it got to a point where the candy store guy was so sorry for me that he used to give me free candy. And then I would go home and give it to my mother. And that, it was in me, I guess. But that's such an important characteristic, because when we got married, my wife was a high school chemistry teacher. We got married. We didn't have much money at all. And I could tell you a funny story about the first night of marriage, but I won't. Unless my daughter gives me permission.
No, that one isn't being discussed now.
No. But what we decided is that we're not going to splurge and go on vacations, and we just suspended our needs for the needs of our children.
A few years ago, I was gonna say, a few years ago, my dad and I spoke at NYU together.
Oh, 1991.
Like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
No.
That was right. No. That was 96, right during the start of the recession. Yes,
it was actually. We won't argue.
2007.
Yeah,
sorry.
2007. Thank you. So we spoke, and I thought, college kids, they'll relate to me. They listened to me. When my dad spoke, they were riveted, and he said to them, my wife and I hadn't gone to Europe until our 25th wedding anniversary.
Right.
And the whole audience was like, oh, these 18, 19-year-olds who have been to Europe a few times or are planning their first trip very soon. And it was really eye-opening. And I think we're going to take this show on the road, my dad and me. Isn't it a good combination?
But let me tell you something. We went on, my wife and I, after I retired, went on 34 cruises, okay?
They saved up a lot.
I'm not a millionaire, but I did it wisely. It so happens that a travel agent went to my school, and he loved me. I was a principal and so on. So he loved me, and he treated me like family. And every few weeks he said, Harold, there's a trip coming out for the Queen Mary. It's going to come in. They have a special on.
50% off.
And that's how we wound up with 32 cruises. However, I want to say this. I had IRAs, and we put away money for IRA. What happened in 1968 was a tax-deferred annuity. That's not my pension.
It wasn't a pension. It was a
So
tax
here I
deferred.
was already in a 2-track system.
Yeah,
I was
pension.
getting a pension when I retire, and also I have tax-deferred annuities.
Right, and that's something that this generation.
But also
clearly
you have
doesn't
to
anymore.
you have to take opportunities. I started with the regular IRAs, but then the Roth IRAs came out. And the Roth IRAs are so much better. I converted as soon as I was able to, put all my IRAs in Roth IRAs. Because when you take out the Roth IRAs, they're not taxable. But you're taxable up front. It's the regular IRAs. So that alone was also very significant in building up reserves. And just one more item. I was sitting on a ship, and the guy next to me says, "What do you do?" Well, I said, "I'm a retired educator." "Oh, really? How long have you been retired?" I said, "Well, 26 years. So he said, 26 years? How could you survive?
And he meant financially.
Now that means, yes, and that means that people are living longer. Your children are going to live longer. And if you don't prepare for a future down the road, it's going to be very, very difficult and struggling. I'm telling you. That's it.
Thank you.
Oh, one other thing.
I wonder why I went into personal
This is free-
finance writing.
This is free advice. Because of my daughter, I developed a system where I said, I'm not going to depend on anybody to help my daughter get a job. I'm going to use my mind.
I'll tell
and-
that story.
You want to tell her?
Yeah.
Tell her. Go
So
ahead.
very quickly, a great idea for recent college graduates is that my dad had a good idea. I went to Brown, and he said, why don't you look through, and he actually did it for me, look through the college alumni magazine every month, and he would circle jobs that sounded like something I'd be interested in. Advertising, or I didn't know what I wanted to do, journalism, and a variety of different jobs. And I would write letters to all of these people, now you can email them, and say, I'm a Brown graduate, and I'm interested in talking to you about your publishing career. And sure enough, one of the people who I met with was this guy, Joel Davis, who said, I met with him and I talked to him, and he said, I can't give you a paying job, which I needed. I couldn't take an internship. But sure enough, he kept my resume in his folder, and 2 years later, that was the Sylvia Porter job, because she had a magazine with his company, and she had a column, and that's when they called me and said, Sylvia Porter needs a researcher. And because of that, because of my dad's idea of going through the alumni magazine, it was very clever. And tell your kids to do that. It still works. It's not the career office, because everyone's going to the career office, but just looking through that alumni magazine. And it doesn't matter what school it is. You go to Queens College or whatever, they're always interesting people who have graduated, and you could write them a letter and really ask for, just an informational interview. So that's a good tip.
A question about the website that you worked on with the Treasury Department, the Money as You Grow. Is it still up?
Yeah, so Money as You Grow, the website actually was adopted by the CFPB, Elizabeth Warren's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which made me really happy because they incorporated it into their website. So they have a lot of information. It's not exactly as cool as it was when I did it, because I did this great graphic, and the government, they weren't allowed, they didn't have the right format to fit it, but they have all the information.
I just have a little story and then a question. When I'm a grandmother, and when my first
You look
daughter,
great.
thank you, thank you. When the first grandchild was growing up, I decided to play the money game with her, and I would put down different pieces of cash, and tell her, if you can figure out how much it is, you can have it, but check it twice.
It's a great
Because
idea.
if you make a mistake, I don't give you anything.
I love that.
So it really worked out very well. When I tried to do it to the next child, she didn't want to have anything to do with it until later on. But when I used to walk in the house, the older one used to say, Grandma, let's play the money game. That was my statement. But the next thing was, I was told by my daughter, and I like to follow what she tells me, I've been doing 529s for the girls for a long time. She doesn't want them to know that they have money. And you're saying they really should know that they
Absolutely.
have money. Okay, so
But it's money for their college. You're great.
Oh,
You're set.
absolutely.
With the 529, it really is money just for their college.
Correct.
So tell them they have money being, set aside for college.
but not tell them how much.
It doesn't really. How old are they?
Well, one is 14, the other one is 10.
I don't think in my book, I
No,
talk about,
doesn't
I don't
matter.
think kids need to know, 10 and 14-year-olds, it has no context.
Yeah.
When they're applying or they're getting
Oh,
ready
for
to
sure.
apply, yeah, then they should know and they have to be involved in that decision if, that's the only money they have. How do they plan? Or so you sound like a great grandma. Not
I'm
a
a-
great grandma, but a great
Wait,
grandma.
wait a minute. I'm not only a great grandma, I do 529s for nieces,
Aw.
nephews, greats, and great-greats.
Amazing.
But not as much as children.
Amazing. My mom used to, for our kids, I have 3 kids, she would for birthdays, sometimes if they turned, 15, she'd put 15 $10 bills on a big oak tag and, for birthday. Or she once made a money tree out of hangers. She was very creative. She would do all these kind of cute things that my kids so remember. She'd usually put $10 bills on one side and 10 chocolate bars on the other side. So it's really fun. Okay, any other questions or? Thank you all so much. Thank you, Karen and Lou. I mean, Karen basically taught me, other than my dad and mom, pretty much everything I knew from the beginning and is probably the best explainer of this. So you're very lucky.